A dog's deepest compliment is not love. It's trust strong enough to silence survival. Ethan Carter didn't understand that at first. Most people don't. They think dogs show affection the same way humans do, with excitement, loyalty, maybe a wagging tail at the front door after a long day. But science has revealed something much deeper hiding underneath those small moments. Because dogs do not give compliments with words. They give them with vulnerability. And one of the most powerful signs can happen in complete silence at 3 o'clock in the morning. Ethan discovered that by accident. One night, after falling asleep on the couch with the TV still glowing softly in the corner of his apartment, he woke up to the strange feeling that someone was watching him. The room was dark except for the blue light flickering across the walls, and there, standing quietly near the hallway, was Shadow. The large German Shepherd wasn't barking. Wasn't pacing. Wasn't asking for food or attention. He was simply staring at Ethan with calm, steady eyes, almost as if he had been awake for hours. At first, Ethan laughed it off. Maybe the dog heard a sound outside. Maybe he needed water. But then Shadow slowly walked back across the room, circled once near the couch, and laid down with a long, heavy sigh before falling immediately back asleep. That moment stayed in Ethan's mind for days. Because something about it felt strangely human. Almost intentional. What Ethan didn't realize is that researchers studying canine cognition have found that dogs constantly monitor the emotional and physical states of the people they trust most. Not because they were trained to do it. Not because they expect rewards. But because over thousands of years living beside humans, dogs evolved to treat our nervous systems as part of their own environment. Your breathing matters to them. Your tone matters to them. Even the tension in your muscles matters to them. Scientists have discovered that dogs can detect subtle changes in cortisol levels, facial expression shifts, and even emotional stress hidden behind normal behavior. In other words, your dog often knows something is wrong before you do. And when a dog chooses to relax beside you after checking on you, that is not simple affection. That is trust at a biological level. Because in the wild, sleep is vulnerability. Deep sleep means danger has temporarily been forgotten. And when a dog fully lets go near you, when their breathing slows, when their muscles soften, when their eyes finally close without fear, their nervous system is making a decision more powerful than most owners realize. It is saying, "You are safe enough for me to stop surviving for a while." The next morning, Ethan could not stop thinking about the way Shadow had looked at him in the dark. There had been no panic in the dog's eyes. No tension. Just quiet attention, followed by immediate calm the second he realized Ethan was okay. Most owners never notice moments like that because they seem too small to matter. But to a dog, small behaviors are often the loudest emotional signals they can give. Later that afternoon, Ethan sat at the kitchen counter answering emails while rain tapped softly against the apartment windows. Shadow was lying near the front door, resting his head on his paws, half asleep. Then a loud motorcycle suddenly roared down the street outside. Ethan barely reacted, but Shadow immediately lifted his head and looked straight at him instead of the window. That caught Ethan off guard. The sound had come from outside, yet Shadow's first instinct was not to investigate the noise. It was to check Ethan's face. Scientists who study canine attachment behavior have documented this exact response pattern for years. When dogs encounter uncertainty, many of them look toward the human they trust most before deciding how to react. Researchers call this social referencing. It is something human infants do with their parents long before they fully understand language. They search another nervous system for emotional guidance. If the trusted person remains calm, the child relaxes. Dogs do the same thing. Which means when your dog looks at you during moments of stress, confusion, or surprise, they are not simply staring. They are asking a biological question. Are we safe right now? Ethan tested it without meaning to. He leaned back in his chair, softened his shoulders, and quietly said, "You are okay, buddy." Almost instantly, Shadow lowered his head back onto the floor with another slow exhale. No pacing. No barking. Just calm. What most people never realize is that a dog relaxing because of your presence may be one of the deepest forms of trust they can offer. Because trust, to a dog, is not emotional in the abstract. It is physical. Their heart rate changes around certain people. Their breathing changes. Their muscle tension changes. Studies using canine heart monitoring have shown that dogs synchronize emotionally with humans they are closely bonded to, especially during stressful moments. In other words, your emotional stability literally becomes part of your dog's environment. That is why some dogs follow one specific person from room to room without needing food, toys, or commands. It is not dependency in the way many people think. It is regulation. The trusted human becomes the place where the dog's nervous system settles most easily. And for the first time, Ethan began to understand something that made his chest tighten a little when he looked at Shadow sleeping near the door. Maybe the dog was never following him because he wanted something. Maybe he was following him because being near Ethan felt like peace. 2 days later, Ethan noticed something else he had somehow ignored for years. Every time he came home from work, Shadow did not explode with excitement the way most people imagine happy dogs should. There was no frantic jumping, no spinning in circles, no chaotic barking echoing through the apartment. Instead, the German Shepherd would walk slowly to the front door, press the side of his body gently against Ethan's leg, and remain there for several quiet seconds before calmly following him inside. At first glance, it looked almost underwhelming. But the more Ethan paid attention, the more he realized those moments felt strangely intimate. Shadow was not asking for stimulation. He was grounding himself against him. Animal behaviorists have found that physical leaning is one of the clearest forms of affiliative behavior in dogs. In simple terms, it is a social bonding action rooted in trust and emotional regulation. Dogs do not press their weight into unstable things. They do it with individuals their nervous system perceives as safe enough to relax around. Wolves display similar behaviors within tightly bonded pack relationships, especially during periods of rest or environmental uncertainty. What shocked Ethan most was how intentional it seemed once he started noticing it. If he sat on the couch after a difficult day, Shadow would quietly settle beside him until their shoulders touched. If Ethan stood in the kitchen late at night unable to sleep, Shadow would eventually walk over and lean softly against the back of his legs without making a sound. It was never demanding. Never restless. It felt almost like the dog was saying, "You do not have to carry everything alone." One evening, Ethan tested a thought he could not get out of his head. Instead of immediately petting Shadow when the dog leaned against him, he simply stayed still. Within seconds he noticed the dog's breathing slow down dramatically. The muscles around Shadow's face softened. His ears relaxed backward slightly. Then came the long exhale Ethan was beginning to recognize as important. Scientists studying canine stress responses often point to sighing and deep exhalation as signs that a dog's body is releasing tension after evaluating an environment as safe. In other words, Shadow was not just enjoying Ethan's company. His entire nervous system was calming down because Ethan was there. Most people think the greatest sign of love from a dog is excitement. But excitement can happen around almost anything. Food creates excitement. Toys create excitement. Visitors create excitement. Calm is different. Calm is selective. Calm is earned. And the deeper Ethan looked into the science behind dog attachment, the more he realized something heartbreaking hidden beneath all of it. Dogs spend their entire lives searching for emotional safety. Not perfect owners. Not endless entertainment. Safety. A place where vigilance can soften. A place where survival can rest. And every time Shadow leaned his weight gently against Ethan without fear, the dog was offering something far more meaningful than affection. He was offering trust without defense. As the weeks passed, Ethan started noticing a pattern that changed the way he saw nearly every interaction with Shadow. The dog was always watching him, but not in the way people usually imagine. Not intensely. Not obsessively. It was quieter than that. More subtle. If Ethan stood up from the couch to grab a glass of water, Shadow would lift his head just enough to track where he was going before relaxing again once he returned. If Ethan disappeared into another room for too long, the dog would eventually wander over, not asking for attention, only checking. Sometimes Shadow would stop in the doorway for 2 seconds, see Ethan sitting there, and calmly walk away again without a sound. At first, Ethan thought it was simple curiosity. But then he came across something animal cognition researchers have discussed for years. Dogs repeatedly monitor the location and emotional state of individuals they are deeply bonded to, especially in shared living spaces. Not because they are clingy. Because connection itself has survival value in the canine brain. In the wild, separation from trusted members of a group could mean vulnerability. Over thousands of years beside humans, dogs adapted that instinct into something remarkably emotional. They do not just want proximity. They want reassurance that the people they trust still exist nearby. One Sunday morning, Ethan was assembling a bookshelf in the living room while soft music played in the background. Shadow had been lying near the hallway most of the morning, barely moving. Then Ethan accidentally dropped a heavy wooden panel onto the floor with a loud crack that echoed through the apartment. Shadow immediately stood up and hurried into the room. But instead of investigating the object that made the noise, the dog walked directly to Ethan and gently pressed his nose against Ethan's hand. That moment hit Ethan harder than he expected. Shadow had not checked the danger first. He had checked him. Researchers studying canine empathy responses have found that dogs often prioritize human emotional states over environmental stimuli, especially when bonded. Attachment is strong. Some studies even show that dogs respond more quickly to signs of human distress than to unfamiliar noises around them. In other words, your dog is not only living beside you. They are emotionally orienting around you. And perhaps the strangest part is how invisible these compliments often look from the outside. Most people would never notice a dog quietly checking on someone from across the room. They would never realize that following you into another room without asking for anything may actually be one of the purest forms of emotional attachment an animal can display. Because attention is expensive in nature. Vigilance costs energy. Monitoring another living being over and over again means that being matters deeply to your nervous system. Ethan slowly began understanding something almost painful hidden underneath Shadow's quiet habits. The dog was not simply sharing space with him. He was building his entire sense of safety around Ethan's presence. And once you realize your dog feels calmer just knowing where you are, some of their smallest behaviors suddenly stop feeling small at all. One rainy evening, Ethan noticed Shadow doing something that would have seemed meaningless to him just a month earlier. After coming home soaked from the storm, Ethan tossed his damp sweatshirt onto the bedroom floor before taking a shower. Nearly an hour later, when he walked back into the room, Shadow was curled up tightly against the sweatshirt with his eyes half closed, breathing slowly like he had fallen into the deepest sleep he had experienced all day. Ethan stood there quietly for a moment, staring at the dog. The bed was right there. The couch was softer. The carpet near the heater was warmer. Yet Shadow had chosen the pile of clothes carrying Ethan's scent. Most owners laugh when dogs steal socks or sleep on dirty laundry. They think it is quirky or funny behavior. But researchers studying canine scent attachment have discovered something extraordinary hidden inside those moments. To a dog, smell is not just information. It is emotional presence. A dog's nose contains up to 300 million scent receptors, compared to roughly 6 million in humans. Entire emotional worlds are built through smell alone. Your scent tells your dog where you have been, how stressed you are, whether you are calm, anxious, tired, or relaxed. In many ways, your smell is more emotionally powerful to your dog than your voice or even your face. Scientists studying separation anxiety found that dogs exposed to an owner's scent during periods of absence displayed lower stress responses, steadier heart rates, and calmer behavior patterns. Not because the scent replaced the person completely, but because the brain of the dog associated that smell with emotional security. Ethan began noticing it everywhere after that. Whenever he left shoes near the front door, Shadow would quietly rest beside them. If Ethan forgot a jacket on the couch, somehow the dog always ended up sleeping against it by the end of the night. It was never destructive. Shadow never chewed the clothes or dragged them around the apartment. He simply stayed near them. As if Ethan's scent itself made the room feel safer. Then one night something happened that made Ethan finally understand how deep that instinct really went. He had worked late and came home exhausted, barely speaking as he dropped his keys onto the kitchen counter. Normally, Shadow greeted him at the door before calmly settling nearby. But that night, the dog immediately walked into the bedroom, grabbed Ethan's sweatshirt from earlier in the week, and carried it into the living room before laying beside Ethan's feet in complete silence. No excitement. No demand for attention. Just presence. Animal cognition experts believe dogs often use scent-associated objects as emotional anchors during moments of uncertainty or stress. In other words, Shadow was not bringing the sweatshirt because it smelled interesting. He was bringing something that emotionally represented Ethan himself. And perhaps one of the deepest compliments a dog can quietly give is this. Out of every scent in the world, every signal, every living thing their instincts could attach to, your dog chooses yours as the smell that feels most like home. About 3 weeks later, Ethan received a phone call that quietly shattered something inside him. It happened on a Thursday evening while he was halfway through reheating leftovers in the kitchen. The number on the screen belonged to his younger sister, Claire, and the second he heard her voice, he knew something was wrong. Their father had been admitted to the hospital after a sudden medical emergency several states away. Claire kept talking, explaining details through uneven breaths, but Ethan barely heard most of it. His chest tightened. His thoughts blurred together. By the time the call ended, the apartment felt strangely silent, like all the air had been pulled out of the room. Ethan sat down slowly on the edge of the couch and stared at the floor without moving. Shadow had been lying near the balcony door moments earlier, but now the German Shepherd was standing quietly in front of him. No barking. No excitement. No pawing for attention. Just stillness. Ethan rubbed his hands over his face and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, trying to steady his breathing. Then Shadow did something Ethan would never forget for the rest of his life. Instead of climbing onto the couch or trying to distract him, the dog slowly lowered himself onto the floor directly against Ethan's feet and stayed there completely motionless. Minutes passed. Then nearly an hour. Ethan did not speak once. But Shadow never moved away. Researchers studying canine emotional synchronization have found that dogs often mirror and respond to human distress in ways that go far beyond trained behavior. In controlled studies, dogs consistently approached humans displaying signs of sadness, anxiety, or emotional overwhelm even when no commands were given and no rewards were involved. Scientists believe this happens because dogs evolved an extraordinary sensitivity to human emotional states through thousands of years of cohabitation. They are not simply reacting to visible sadness. They are reacting to shifts in breathing, posture, muscle tension, vocal tone, even changes in scent caused by stress hormones released through the skin. In many ways, your dog experiences your emotional state before you ever explain it. Ethan noticed something strange as the night went on. Shadow was not acting nervous himself. The dog was calm. Deeply calm. His breathing remained slow and steady against Ethan's shoes, almost rhythmic, like he was lending stability to the room itself. Studies on canine co-regulation suggest that bonded dogs can actually influence human stress responses through physical presence alone. Gentle touch, proximity, and synchronized calm behavior can lower heart rate and reduce cortisol levels in both the dog and the human. In other words, sometimes your dog is not seeking comfort from you. Sometimes they are trying to provide it. Around midnight, Ethan finally whispered, "I do not know what I would do without you." Shadow responded by lifting his head slightly and pressing it against Ethan's knee before settling back down again with complete trust. No demand. No interruption. Just quiet companionship during one of the hardest nights Ethan had faced in years. And perhaps that is one of the deepest compliments a dog can ever give a person. Not staying beside you when life feels easy, but choosing to remain close when your sadness changes the entire emotional atmosphere of the room. Because dogs do not always try to fix your pain. Sometimes they simply refuse to let you face it alone. After that night, something between Ethan and Shadow felt different. Not louder. Not dramatic. Just deeper. Ethan began noticing the smallest behaviors carrying emotional weight he had completely missed before. One of them happened every single morning. Around 6:30, just before sunrise reached the apartment windows, Shadow would quietly walk into Ethan's bedroom and sit beside the bed without making a sound. He never barked to wake him up. Never jumped onto the mattress. He simply waited there patiently until Ethan opened his eyes. And the moment Ethan looked at him, Shadow's expression softened in a way that almost did not seem real. His ears relaxed. His breathing slowed. His eyes narrowed slightly in complete calm. Then, only after Ethan spoke to him, the dog would gently rest his head against the side of the bed for a few seconds before walking away toward the kitchen. Most people think eye contact with dogs is simple attention. It is not. In fact, prolonged eye contact in the animal world is often considered threatening. Wolves rarely hold soft eye contact with one another for long periods unless deep trust already exists. But dogs evolve differently alongside humans. Researchers studying canine attachment discovered that mutual relaxed eye contact between dogs and humans triggers the release of oxytocin in both species. Oxytocin is sometimes called the bonding hormone because it plays a major role in emotional attachment between parents and children, close family members, and trusted companions. Which means when your dog looks at you softly and willingly, something biological is happening beneath the surface. Your dog is not simply observing you. They are bonding with you in real time. Ethan realized Shadow almost never stared at him intensely. The dog's gaze was always gentle, brief, and strangely emotional. Sometimes Ethan would glance over from the couch and catch Shadow already looking at him from across the room before the dog slowly blinked and looked away. Other times, during evening walks through the neighborhood, Shadow would periodically turn his head back just to check Ethan's position before continuing forward calmly. Animal cognition experts often describe this as emotional referencing behavior. Your dog is repeatedly making sure the person they trust is still emotionally connected to them. One evening, Ethan sat on the apartment floor while Shadow rested nearby chewing quietly on one of his favorite toys. Without thinking, Ethan spoke softly and said, "You really do watch over me, do you not?" Shadow immediately stopped chewing and looked directly into Ethan's eyes. But there was something unusual about the moment. The dog's expression carried absolutely no tension. No alertness. No anticipation of commands. Just openness. Complete emotional softness. Ethan reached out slowly and rested his hand against the side of Shadow's neck. The German Shepherd closed his eyes almost immediately beneath the touch. Scientists studying canine relaxation responses have found that dogs only fully close their eyes around humans they perceive as emotionally safe because shutting down visual awareness creates temporary vulnerability. In other words, when your dog relaxes enough to stop monitoring the environment while you touch them, they are offering an extraordinary level of trust. And perhaps one of the quietest compliments a dog can give is allowing themselves to become emotionally unguarded in your presence. Because the safest place in a dog's world is not always a location. Sometimes it is a person. Several nights later, Ethan experienced a moment that finally changed everything for him. It was close to 2 in the morning when he woke up thirsty and walked quietly into the living room for a glass of water. The apartment was completely dark except for faint city lights glowing through the curtains. As Ethan stepped past the couch, he stopped without even realizing why. Shadow was asleep so deeply that he had not heard Ethan enter the room at all. The German Shepherd was stretched across the rug near the couch with his legs loose, stomach exposed slightly toward the ceiling, breathing slow and heavy in complete surrender to sleep. Ethan stood there silently, almost afraid to move. He had owned dogs before, but something about this felt different. Shadow did not look alert. He did not look ready to react. Every muscle in his body had completely let go. Even his ears, usually tuned to every tiny sound in the apartment building, remained perfectly relaxed. Then Ethan noticed something else. The dog was sleeping directly between the hallway leading to the front door and the couch where Ethan usually fell asleep at night. Not guarding the apartment. Guarding proximity to him. Animal behavior experts often point out that sleep is one of the most vulnerable states any animal can enter. In the wild, deep sleep lowers awareness, slows reaction time, and temporarily disables constant environmental monitoring. For survival-driven animals, this level of vulnerability is not given away carelessly. Researchers studying canine attachment behavior have found that dogs choose sleeping positions based heavily on emotional security. Dogs that feel uncertain tend to remain partially alert, sleeping lightly or positioning themselves for quick movement. But dogs who feel profoundly safe around a person often display something entirely different. Full body relaxation, exposed stomachs, deep breathing, twitching dreams, complete nervous system surrender. Ethan slowly sat down on the edge of the couch without making a sound. Shadow did not wake up. The dog merely shifted slightly in his sleep and let out another long exhale before settling even deeper into the rug. That was the moment Ethan finally understood what all the smaller behaviors had been building toward this entire time. The leaning. The checking on him from other rooms. The scent attachment. The soft eye contact. The silent companionship during difficult nights. None of those things were random habits. They were pieces of one enormous emotional truth. Shadow trusted him enough to stop surviving around him. Scientists sometimes describe secure attachment in dogs as the ability to deactivate vigilance in the presence of a trusted human. In simple terms, your dog's brain eventually decides, I do not need to stay on guard here. And perhaps there is no deeper compliment than that. Because dogs are born carrying instincts built for caution, for alertness, for survival. Yet when a dog falls into complete, vulnerable, dream-filled sleep beside you, their nervous system is making a decision more powerful than words could ever express. It is saying, I believe you will protect me while I let go of the world for a while. Ethan remained there quietly in the dark for several minutes, watching Shadow sleep peacefully at his feet, and for the first time in his life, he realized that trust from a dog is not loud at all. It is almost always silent. The following weekend, Ethan took Shadow to a quiet park just outside the city, a place they had visited dozens of times before without much thought. The air was cool, the walking trails were damp from rain the night before, and the trees swayed softly above them while early morning sunlight filtered through the branches. Shadow moved calmly beside Ethan without pulling on the leash, occasionally stopping to smell the grass before catching back up again with relaxed confidence. A few months earlier, Ethan probably would have spent the walk distracted by his phone or lost in his own thoughts. But now he found himself watching Shadow differently. Really watching him. The small glances backward. The way the dog slowed down any time Ethan fell slightly behind. The quiet moments where Shadow simply chose to walk close enough for their shoulders to nearly touch. None of it felt accidental anymore. Halfway through the trail, Ethan sat down on a weathered wooden bench overlooking the lake, while Shadow settled beside him without being asked. The German Shepherd leaned gently against Ethan's leg and closed his eyes beneath the warmth of the morning sun. Ethan rested one hand on the dog's neck and felt the slow rhythm of his breathing. Calm. Steady. Completely at peace. And suddenly Ethan understood something that years of owning dogs had never taught him before. Dogs do not measure relationships the way humans do. They do not care about status, success, appearance, or perfection. They care about emotional safety, consistency, presence. The feeling that the world becomes softer when you are nearby. Researchers studying long-term canine attachment have found that dogs build emotional maps around trusted humans in ways remarkably similar to young children. A secure bond changes how they respond to stress, uncertainty, exploration, and even rest. Dogs who feel emotionally safe become more confident, more relaxed, and more socially open because their nervous system no longer expects danger around every corner. In many ways, the relationship itself becomes their shelter. Ethan looked down at Shadow resting peacefully against him, and quietly laughed to himself. All those years, he had believed he was the one taking care of the dog. But now it felt much more balanced than that. Shadow had been protecting something inside him too. The loneliness after long workdays. The silence in the apartment. The grief he never fully talked about after his divorce. Somehow, without language, the dog had noticed all of it. And maybe that is why the deepest connection between humans and dogs feels so emotional to so many people. Because dogs do not love us for who we pretend to be. They respond to who we really are beneath the noise, beneath the performance, beneath the walls we build around ourselves. Shadow slowly opened his eyes and looked up at Ethan with the same calm softness Ethan had come to recognize over the past few months. Then, without hesitation, the dog rested his head gently across Ethan's leg and let out one long, peaceful breath. No excitement. No demand. Just trust. Complete and quiet. Ethan stared out across the water while his hand rested again